Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, I continue to bring you the next video in the story of Diep and CEO James. Under the pale morning sunlight of the countryside, Diep gently reminded little Nee to water the vegetables more carefully. Each scoop of water was lifted slowly and poured evenly over the soil still damp with early dew. She bent down to straighten a few leaning plants, her hands covered in mud, yet her movements remained careful and familiar, as if repeated countless times over many months. The small garden behind the old house was not large, but it held within it so much effort, hope, and patience shared by aunt and niece. The sweet potatoes and kohlrabi pulled from that soil were not merely produce to sell at the market. They were a means of survival, a fragile lifeline that allowed Diep to keep going through days weighed down by endless hardship. Little Nee followed closely beside Diep, chatting cheerfully while working, asking all sorts of trivial questions. Her tiny hands were smeared with dirt, her fingernails packed with mud, yet her face glowed with pure innocence. The child did not fully understand the struggles of life. She only knew that going out to the garden with her aunt each morning, running around in the sun and wind, was a simple joy. From time to time, Nee would look up and smile at Diep, that clear, innocent smile making Diep's heart soften. For Diep, just seeing the child smile like that was enough to ease the fatigue that had built up through long nights, pushing heavy worries momentarily aside. She told herself that as long as Nee could remain carefree and at peace, no matter how hard life became, she had to keep moving forward. But life was not always as gentle as that morning. The following days of trading brought one obstacle after another. Goods sold slowly, costs kept rising, and familiar customers grew fewer. The closer it came to the Lunar New Year, the heavier the pressure became. Everyone needed money, needed goods, while Diep found herself struggling more with each passing day. After many sleepless nights of calculation, she was forced to make a decision, to rent out the warehouse and temporarily set aside her unfinished dream of doing business. It was not an easy decision. A fleeting sense of sadness passed through her heart, mixed with disappointment in herself. Only a few months of trying, so many plans not yet taking shape, and already she had to let go. Even so, Diep did not complain, nor did she let her sadness show in front of Nee. She understood clearly that there are times when people must step back, not because they are weak, but because they need time and strength to prepare for another beginning. That afternoon, as she closed the warehouse door, Diep stood there for a long while, staring into the empty space inside. Everything was still there, yet the feeling had changed. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that this was not the end, just a necessary pause on a long, thorny road ahead. Elsewhere in the story, James was facing quiet, smoldering turmoil within his own heart. In recent days, he had grown increasingly withdrawn, speaking far less than before. Through seemingly casual remarks, half-spoken hints, and unusual silences, James gradually pieced together a truth that sent a chill through him. Diep's biological mother was still alive, and in the past had shared a deep relationship with Mr. Hone, the strict father who had always fiercely opposed the relationship between James and Diep. Fragments of scattered memories overlapped, forming a hazy yet haunting picture. James recalled his father's cold gaze whenever Diep was mentioned, the harsh objections that had once seemed rooted merely in prejudice and differences in background. Now, as the truth slowly surfaced, he began to sense that behind that rigid opposition lay something far deeper and far more complicated. The more he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. He wondered whether those fierce objections had truly been just about origins and circumstances, or whether they were tied to a long-buried secret that even he had never known. Within James, a quiet unease steadily grew. He worried for Diep, yet at the same time feared what might happen if that truth were ever fully exposed. Amid the tangled thoughts, James realized that everything was gradually slipping beyond his control. What he once believed to be clear now turned uncertain, and the road ahead, the road that held Diep and little Nee, suddenly seemed shrouded in a grayness he could not quite name. The fear inside James did not come suddenly, it grew day by day, smoldering and heavy, like a stone pressing against his chest. It made him want to speak many times, only to stop himself just before the words could escape. James feared Diep's eyes, feared the moment she might look at him with shock and confusion, then slowly fall apart when she realized what he was beginning to doubt. He could not bear to imagine that scene. To James, Diep had already endured too much pain in the past, and he did not want to be the next person to hurt her once again. That was why James chose silence, a silence filled with inner conflict, where every thought collided violently in his mind. It was not because he did not trust Diep. On the contrary, it was precisely because he trusted her and loved her that he could not allow himself to act recklessly. James understood that if there was anything unclear or hidden, then that very ambiguity was the greatest danger. It could destroy everything, not only Diep's fragile peace, but also the already delicate relationship between them. After many sleepless nights, James made a decision he knew would change many things. He would hire a private investigator. He was willing to accept any cost, any risk, in exchange for one clear answer, an answer strong enough to put an end to the doubts that were slowly eating away at him. Not to expose anyone, nor to pass judgment, but simply to know the truth. To James, no matter how painful the truth might be, it was still better than allowing vague fear to keep creeping in and destroying what he was desperately trying to protect. He told himself this was the only way to protect Diep, and also the only way to protect his own feelings. That evening, Diep's small house warmed up once again in its own quiet way. The scent of grilled meat filled the space, blending with little Nee's clear, cheerful laughter, creating an atmosphere that felt surprisingly close and peaceful. Soft yellow light spilled over the simple dining table, where a few modest dishes were neatly laid out. There were no delicacies, no lavish feast, just familiar food, yet full of love and sincere care. James sat there, silently observing every moment. He listened as Diep talked about the small garden, about newly planted vegetable beds, about business still being difficult but how she was trying her best to manage. Her voice was steady and gentle, without complaint or blame. Every word carried patience and a quiet faith in tomorrow. James realized that it was precisely this calm resilience in Diep that made him feel both admiration and a deep ache in his heart. Little Nee sat beside them, eating while sharing innocent stories from her day, occasionally breaking into giggles over the smallest things. That laughter echoed through the room, easing some of the tension James had been struggling to hide. He suddenly realized that moments like these, so ordinary on the surface, were in fact the most precious. They were what he did not want to lose, not even once. Amid the small talk and gentle jokes, James and Diep gradually recognized a strange similarity between them. They both cherished peace and did not seek anything flashy. They both valued simple moments, sitting side by side, sharing a warm meal, hearing a child's pure laughter, and feeling that it was already enough. Together, they dreamed of a home that was not loud or showy, but solid and safe, a place where each person could truly be themselves, without fear or defenses. James quietly watched Diep, a feeling he could not quite name rising within him. He knew that it was precisely because of these simple things that he could not allow any secret to hurt her. Even though the road ahead was still filled with uncertainty, even though the unease in his heart had not yet faded, in that moment, with the small house bathed in warmth, James made a silent promise to himself: he would do everything in his power to protect this peace. Not loudly, not hastily, but quietly and steadfastly, just as Diep herself continued to live each day. When little Nee had fallen fast asleep, her steady breathing softly filling the small room, her face looking strangely peaceful under the dim glow of the night lamp, Diep gently pulled the blanket a little higher and quietly closed the door. She was afraid that even the slightest sound might disturb that fragile sleep. Watching Nee sleep, a feeling both tender and bittersweet passed through Diep's heart, as if all the worries outside were momentarily left behind that half-closed door. Diep returned to the kitchen and made James a cup of hot coffee. As the boiling water poured down, a thin stream of steam rose, carrying the familiar aroma of coffee and slowly spreading through the house. The night was far quieter than the daytime, every small sound becoming clearer. The soft clink of the spoon against the cup, the gentle sound of running water, all blended into a slow, peaceful rhythm. Diep carried the coffee to the table and placed it in front of James. Her gaze paused briefly on his hands, which were lightly clenched, as if holding on to thoughts he could not yet speak aloud. They sat beside each other at the old wooden table, the pale yellow light casting a warm hue over everything. Outside, the countryside night passed in silence. Now and then, a light breeze rattled the window frame, bringing with it the distinct chill of year-end days. James sipped the coffee slowly, the warm bitterness spreading on his tongue before fading into a lingering aftertaste. Diep sat across from him, her hands clasped together, her eyes fixed on the empty space ahead, as though she was thinking about many things left unsaid. They began to talk about the future, not grand or distant dreams, yet not clearly shaped either. Diep mentioned the difficulties ahead, the instability of her business, the approaching Lunar New Year while everything still felt unsettled. Her voice was low and unhurried, without complaint or resentment, simply recounting what was happening, like someone accustomed to facing reality with calm acceptance. James listened. Each of her words fell softly into his ears, yet weighed a little heavier on his heart. Diep turned to look at James, her gaze gentle and steady. She smiled faintly, not a radiant smile, but one reassuring enough to bring a sense of calm. She said she believed everything would eventually be fine, that life was never truly smooth, but as long as they had each other by their side, walking together and sharing the load, even the hardest challenges would find a way through. For Diep, that belief required no grand promises or distant plans, only a quiet, steadfast presence each day. James looked at her, warmth rising in his chest. There was a unique steadiness in Diep, unassuming, unshowy, yet strong enough to make others want to lean on her. And yet, alongside that warmth, a silent heaviness pressed against his chest. The secret James was pursuing, the answer he was waiting for, could become a sharp blade, cutting through everything before him. The peaceful little house, the soft yellow light, the cup of coffee still steaming, and Diep, who placed her full trust in him, all of it could shatter because of a truth not yet revealed. James remained silent for a long time. He did not voice the thoughts swirling in his mind, nor did he reveal the fear growing clearer with each passing moment. He was afraid that even a single change in his gaze, a brief hesitation, would be enough for Diep to sense something was wrong. So he chose to keep his voice calm, to hold a gentle smile on his lips, allowing that peaceful moment to pass as naturally as possible. Inside James, the conflict deepened. On one side, the desire to protect Diep at all costs; on the other, the fear that this very silence might hurt her even more when the truth finally surfaced. That night, outside, the cold wind slipped softly through the cracks, carrying a sharp hint of dew, making the air feel heavier. The small house trembled gently with each gust, yet inside remained the familiar sense of peace. The yellow light still glowed, the coffee on the table still held its warmth, and the two of them continued to sit side by side, sharing the simplest, most ordinary moments. No one mentioned fear. No one spoke of the secrets being hidden. Yet between them existed a fragile pause, like a thin thread stretched taut between trust and unease. Within that calm, a quiet question hovered, unspoken, yet more present than ever. It lived in James's eyes whenever he looked at Diep, in the tenderness Diep offered him, and in the silences that lingered a little longer than usual. A question no one dared to voice, yet both could feel its weight, like a thin cloud hanging over an otherwise clear sky. Do James and Diep truly share a blood relationship, as the fear increasingly haunting him suggests? Or is it all merely a cruel misunderstanding of fate, woven from scattered memories and unnamed anxieties? The answer still lies ahead. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình nhé. Hôm nay thì mình đang làm video James và Diệp đây mọi người ơi. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người ở video ngày mai nhé. Cái này mình chết rồi. Tạm biệt mọi người. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video tiếp theo nhé.